आर्थिक सर्वे जो यानी कि इकोनॉमिक सर्वे को लेकर चीफ इकोनॉमिक एडवाइजर वी नागेश्वरन ने जी बिजनेस की एग्जीक्यूटिव एडिटर स्वाति खंडेलवाल से खास बातचीत की है। इस दौरान उन्होंने कहा कि भारतीय इकोनॉमी पर भरोसा प्रगाढ़ हो रहा है, आगे भी जारी रहेंगी अच्छी चीज़ें। वहीं ग्लोबल संकट की चुनौतियों से भी उन्होंने आगाह किया है, इस ओर इशारा किया है।
हेलो एंड वेलकम। इस खास पेशकश में आप सभी का स्वागत है। हम बात कर रहे हैं आज एक दिन बजट से पहले इकोनॉमिक सर्वे ऑफ इंडिया। जी हाँ, हर बार की तरह एक दिन पहले बजट से टेबल होता है। फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर निर्मला सीतारमण जी ने पार्लियामेंट में इसके पेश किया और इस डॉक्यूमेंट के तहत हम प्रोजेक्शंस करते हैं ऑफ इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ। बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट इंडिकेटर है कि किस तरफ और किस दिशा में भारत की इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ होगी। आज की इकोनॉमिक सर्वे में क्या खास है ये समझेंगे। कुछ हेडलाइंस यहां से जो निकल कर आई है, सबसे बड़ी बात कही गई है कि ऑल इज वेल, इंडिया को वरी करने की जरूरत नहीं है जहां तक वेवरिंग ग्रोथ की बात है। बट एक्चुअली क्या फैक्टर्स हैं जो इंडिया को ये कॉन्फिडेंस दे रहे हैं और आगे किस तरीके का आउटलुक रख रहे हैं इन दिस वेरी वेरी वॉलेटाइल जियोपॉलिटिकल सेटअप। मेरे साथ इस वक्त वी अनंत नागेश्वरन जी जो चीफ इकोनॉमिक एडवाइजर है भारत के, वो जुड़ रहे हैं। सर बहुत बहुत स्वागत है आपका, धन्यवाद हमें समय दिया। सबसे पहले सर, जिस तरह से आपने ये डॉक्यूमेंट तैयार किया है और हम जीडीपी ग्रोथ 6 से 6.8% फॉर FY24 प्रोजेक्ट कर रहे हैं, जो कि स्लोएस्ट इन 3 इयर्स, बट अमिड्स द सेटअप, ग्लोबल सेटअप, ये एक फास्ट ग्रोइंग इकोनॉमी की तरफ हम बात कर रहे हैं बढ़ते हुए। क्या फैक्टर्स हैं जो कंट्रीब्यूट करेंगे सर इस ग्रोथ को?
Thank you. First of all, you're right that although the growth rate for 23-24 is likely lower than what it is in the current financial year, it does still represent probably the fastest growing rate among economic growth rate among major economies. And the reason is that India's domestic economic recovery is now has picked up momentum, it has a good steam ahead, and improved balance sheets in the banking system and in the corporate sector are responsible for driving credit growth, for investment growth in the coming financial year as well. And if you look at the data for the first half of this financial year, investments by the government and by the private sector are growing briskly, and private consumption is also healthy. So overall, the picture is one of steady growth, and that is what we are projecting. And the reason why it is slightly on the lower side compared to the current financial year is that there is going to be some lagged effect of the interest rate increases that has happened in India and elsewhere in the world, and therefore we do see a slight reduction in the growth rate. But as the International Monetary Fund mentioned this morning, the growth rate in 24-25, they, for example, see it rebounding to 6.8% from their forecast of 6.1% for 23-24. And we also feel that on average, India's growth rate for the remainder of the decade will be somewhere between 6.5% and 7%. And that could be subject to a few basis points here and there, but that is the average trend we expect, because we now have most of the building blocks in place in respect of reforms, in respect of a banking system, in respect of a healthy corporate sector. All these three are now going to kick in together to deliver the growth rates that we expect.
ओके, फेयर इनफ। तो आपने समझाया किस तरह से ग्रोथ और क्यों ग्रोथ हम अब अच्छी एक्सपेक्ट कर सकते हैं। जो पास्ट के काम थे इन टर्म्स ऑफ द क्लीन अप एक्ट ऑफ द बैंक्स, जो आपने बताया, कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर यहाँ पर पिकअप होते हुए, और वो सब चीज ग्रोथ की तरफ डायरेक्ट कर रहा है। लेकिन सर, मैं आपसे जानना चाहूंगी, जो कॉशियस अप्रोच रखी है सर्वे ने, ऑब्वियसली द रेड फ्लैग्स दैट वी हैव टू वॉच आउट फॉर, उन पर क्या व्यू है और वो कितना बड़ा कंसर्न हो सकते हैं, चाहे वो रुपी के डेप्रिसिएशन की बात हो या इन्फ्लेशन की कंसर्न्स भी आ सकते हैं, उसको कितना हमें महत्व देना चाहिए?
Well, that's a fair question. I mean, because the global environment is still very much rife with uncertainty. So you raise questions about inflation, currency. Look, we faced a fairly stiff challenge in 2022 on both these aspects, the currency and inflation. But proactive management by the government and by the central bank ensured that the rupee depreciation was far smoother and less volatile than for several other countries in advanced countries. And inflation in India peaked at 7.8% in April 2022, and since then has only come down. And there are several advanced nations grappling with the higher inflation rate even now, while their target is 2%. And India's target was between 2 and 6%, and the peak was 7.8%. So our peak inflation rate was not too far away from the upper end of the inflation range that our central bank is targeting. So should some of these concerns come back, and our case is that given the global economy slowing down in 23-24, some of these things may not be as serious a challenge as they were last year. But if at all there are challenges to our somewhat benign view of the Indian economy, those challenges will come predominantly from the rest of the world, not internally.
Okay, fair enough, and you have a valid point on that. But sir, क्योंकि इस वक्त जो ग्लोबल सेटअप है उसमें इंडिया इज अपियरिंग टू बी अ शाइनिंग स्टार, यस, हम जो फॉरेन फ्लोज इनफ्लोज हैं इंडिया के लिए उस पर कितना डिपेंड करेंगे? हमारी डोमेस्टिक कंजम्पशन स्टोरी, वेल, वी आर होपिंग दैट इट रिमेन्स इंटैक्ट, बट कितना सपोर्ट हमें फॉरेन इनफ्लोज से रहेगा, एंड हमारी इकोनॉमी में वो कितना बड़ा पार्ट प्ले करेंगे? क्योंकि अगर हम कैपिटल मार्केट्स की भी बात करें पिछले 2-2.5 साल में कोविड के असर में, इफ यू रिमूव दैट, वी डिड क्वाइट वेल आफ्टर दैट. अभी थोड़े से टाइम से वॉलेटिलिटी वापस आई है, बट बाय एंड लार्ज द कैपिटल इनफ्लोज इनटू द कंट्री, उस पर क्या व्यू रखते हैं आप?
So we have to separate foreign direct investment and foreign portfolio investment.
Yes.
Portfolio investment is subject to their own risk sentiments and what is happening in their domestic market, etc. But what we have seen is that compared to the years that went by, today portfolio investors' attitude from overseas does not matter as much as they used to, because Indian domestic inflows are strong enough to offset whatever they do. So in that sense, we don't have to take the factor as a risk factor. Yes, to some extent, current account deficits have to be financed by all kinds of flows, official flows, bilateral credit flows, direct investments, portfolio investments, etc. To that extent, portfolio inflows will matter. And Indian stock markets are probably, considered expensive by some of them. So these things are tactical, short-term decisions made by institutional investors, and we can't really predict them. But India's direct investment flows have been quite stable. Remittances have been extremely good. And in spite of the fact that the global economy was going through a period of inflation in 2022, Indian external remittances into India, according to the World Bank, are likely to touch $100 billion in the calendar year 2022. So overall, I think foreign direct investments into India will maintain a steady trend or even go up, because many countries and many companies are looking to diversify from their existing manufacturing bases overseas, and that will serve India well.
But Mr. Nageswaran, I want to ask you this question. I know इससे sentiment जरूरी है समझना of how people will look at investing in India. And I think ये India story की बात कर रहे हैं. We all know about what's happening with one of the big corporate houses today. But I'm just trying to understand कि from the government standpoint and from the country standpoint, इसको कैसे देखा जाए? Because one company can actually represent the mood and sentiment of how they should come and invest in India. कितना बड़ा डेंट या हर्ट होगा? बिकॉज एक तरफ हम बात कर रहे हैं इंडिया नीड्स capital investments, needs a lot of money to be funded, kick in the private cycle and all of that, capex cycle. इसको कैसे लेना चाहिए? What is a big large message that you want to give out from the government standpoint on things like this that kind of shakes India's story, also growth story?
No, I don't think it shakes the India story, because the fact remains that Recently, we have heard many hitherto skeptical observers note the fact that India's economy is formalizing far more quickly. And today we had the International Monetary Fund coming up with its own projections of GDP growth in India, which clearly show us that India's growth rate, ultimately India's growth rate is going to be pretty consistent and steady at above 6%, even accelerating in 24-25. Ultimately, investors would look at that, and even the company that put out the report against the corporate group separates the corporate story from the Indian story, and therefore we should acknowledge that. And whatever is happening is between one corporate group and the market and investors. And I don't think we should generalize it as an India-centric story.
Okay, fair point, sir. It's a very fair point. एक्सपोर्ट्स को लेकर एक जो तकलीफ हुई है इस समय, क्योंकि ऑब्वियसली ग्लोबल मार्केट स्लो डाउन कर रहे हैं, तो जो एक्सपोर्टर्स हैं उनको कैसे एड्रेस करेंगे, वहां पर क्या अपॉर्चुनिटी? आपकी रिपोर्ट और सर्वे में बोला गया है एग्री सेक्टर में बहुत अच्छा एक एक्सपोर्ट पोटेंशियल है, बट एक्सपोर्ट्स ओवरऑल पर क्या व्यू रखते हैं सर?
Look, I mean, exports in the first 9 months of the current financial year, if you look at both goods and services, they are running at about 16% higher than the previous year's 9 months, April to December of 21, and compare that to April to December 2022, the combined export of goods and services is 16% higher. Yes, of course, in the last 3 months, some of the merchandise exports growth has slowed down. But that is to be expected because the world economy is slowing because of the series of rate hikes that we have seen in developed countries. But therefore, export growth will have to come from market share gains, which means our own sellers in the global markets have to invest in quality and competitiveness. And that cannot be relied on only through exchange rate depreciation. It has to be through R&D, it has to be through cost competitiveness, product innovation and design, etc. And therefore, our businesses also have to invest in R&D, applied R&D.
Okay, $5 trillion economy.
We have to probably finish.
Yes, sir, quick and last question. 5 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी का जो एक हमने टारगेट लिया है, वो आपने उसके बारे में भी चर्चा की है. कौन से सेक्टर्स आपके हिसाब से सबसे ज्यादा ग्रोथ अपॉर्चुनिटी प्रोवाइड करेंगे इन लेट्स से नेक्स्ट 3 to 4 years?
I think for an economy that is transitioning from lower middle income to higher middle income, almost all sectors are going to play an important role in our evolution. We are going to be a $3.5 trillion economy, $3.5 trillion economy by the end of March 2023. And on an average, in spite of rupee depreciation in the last 20 to 30 years, the Indian dollar GDP has grown at an average rate of around 9%. And if by some chance the United States dollar weakens in the coming years, as it's quite possible, then the rate at which dollar GDP grows could even be faster than the 9% that we have witnessed on an average over the last 30 years. So in that sense, these numbers give us some broad pointers to aim at, but ultimately for any government, the key is to do the things that the governments have to do, and end results will take care of themselves, including a particular level of the GDP number, whether it is in rupee or dollars. Ultimately, there are many factors that have to come together to determine this number. All we can do is to make sure that we do the right things and the outcomes will follow.
All right, sir. On that note, thank you so much. आपने हमें समय दिया और बताया किस तरह से ये सर्वे क्या-क्या खास बात कहता है. बहुत धन्यवाद आपका.
Thank you.